celebrate the history and the legacy of former President Nelson Mandela. And on this day, we dedicated 67 minutes of our time to giving back and making a significant difference. So to look at how South Africans are honoring Tata's legacy, we're joined now by Nikiwe Pikisha, who is a board member of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. I said to you that it must feel so strange being on the other side of the chair for once and now being interviewed.
It's actually quite fun. I like what you've done with the place.
Well, thank you very much. We're really redecorating. It's one such a legacy that we should never ever take for granted. And I think that every time we have conversations about Nelson Mandela Day, about the significance about Utata Madiba and the legacy, it's about how the next generation is able to carry out this legacy and understand the significance of why we even celebrate and why even we commemorate days like this.
I mean, I think it's absolutely critical because it marks the date of his birth. We did this with great aplomb last year at the date of his centenary. Now, in his 101st year, we want people to remember his life, the many sacrifices he made towards freedom, human rights, the struggle for human rights and justice in South Africa and globally. We would like people to reflect on the impact of his life, but also how they themselves begin to internalize those lessons and start to deliver on those in their own lives and in their own way.
Is the foundation afraid or concerned that we're going to forget and forget the life, forget the man? Because they say that in death, you know, as much as we heal, but sometimes we forget the memories. We forget just how much of an impact this person made in our lives simply because they're no longer with us, walking day to day, and we're not able to see them. How do we keep that?
I don't think there's a fear that we will forget, and I think this is why the work of the Nelson Mandela Foundation is so important, and particularly days like the 18th of July, which is Mandela Day, where we mark his life, we reflect on his life, we celebrate those achievements, but we also do some deep thinking about how do we come up with lasting and sustainable solutions to some of the most pressing problems facing South Africa and the world? So Mandela Day, for example, this year, and what we're going to be focusing over the next 10 years are 5 key focus areas. We've done a bit of research to try and find out where are the most pressing problems in South Africa. So our key focus areas over the next 10 years are going to be around education and literacy, food and nutrition, shelter, sanitation and active citizenship. So if we are actively and collectively working to fight those particular challenges and to eradicate poverty, then in essence we are upholding the legacy of Madiba. We will never forget if we continue to strive for the same things that he wanted, such as improving the lot of South Africans.
Obviously that is goes hand in hand with the amount of partnerships and collaborations and political will that will come into this as well. And how are you faring with that regard, being able to draw in? And it's always a very tricky space to navigate, isn't it? Being able to draw in private sector, public sector, and get them into one room and say this is the vision going forward, and this is what Utata Madiba would have actually liked to see a South Africa that is better against those goals that you've mentioned.
We've been very fortunate that since the inception of the Nelson Mandela Foundation that we have had much support from the public, from the private sector and from those in the political sphere. So we are very fortunate then, and also globally, because as you know, Mandela Day is an international day which is marked and which was instituted by the UN 10 years ago today. So we've been very fortunate in terms of getting that kind of support. But I suppose in a difficult economic climate, both domestically and globally, it's always hard to be raising funds, for example, for the important work that we do in a depressed economic environment. But we are very fortunate that we have built these kinds of partnerships and continue to raise support both domestically and abroad.
How do we start, educating? Let's focus on the education element of it. How do we start educating, particularly those that are in schools, particularly those that are a 6-year-old? How do we educate a 6-year-old so that they understand the impact of Utata Madiba? And when they read it from the textbook, it's not just Nelson Mandela was born and died, that actually there's intimate details and intricacies so that they can identify themselves with the man that walked, with the legacy, and also with the fight against an apartheid system.
I think you raise some very important points in your question. Firstly, when we look at education, which is going to be a key focus area for us, we're looking specifically at early childhood development and ensuring that young children have all the kinds of resources and support, because we know that if people have education, it is a key bridge when we're looking at reducing inequality in South Africa. So education is important, and intrinsic to that is going to be educating people about the legacy and the leadership, not just Nelson Mandela, Mandela, but the leaders of his generation who sacrificed so much, who fought so hard for the freedom in which we enjoy. But I think the lessons also come in how people conduct themselves in society. For example, we live in a time where there's growing polarization, not just in South Africa, but also abroad as well. But if we remind young people, even as young as 6-year-olds, that the lessons of tolerance that Madiba preached, that he lived by, we can begin to shape a different kind of society and a different kind of future.
And of course, so that speaks significantly to the issue around being an active citizen. Nikiwe, thanks a lot for joining us this evening, and all the best. I know that it's going to be an uphill 10 years, but a very memorable 10 years, I think, that also for the
Thank you so much, and thank you for your support.
Of course, we're speaking to Nikiwe Pigisha from the Nelson Mandela Foundation, giving us insight on that. While Newsnight Sport